The Silence of the Lambs isn't just a movie, it's a cult horror ritual that transformed the face of the psychological thriller. Since the 90s, nothing has managed to burrow into viewers' minds as deeply and disturbingly. But behind Hannibal Lecter's icy elegance and the fear stirred by Buffalo Bill lies even more darkness. Behind the scenes of this film, things happen that make watching it just the beginning of the story. From real-life murderers who inspired the script, to actors paralyzed with fear, to hidden symbolism in the movie poster that connects with Salvador Dali's works and real death. In today's episode, the 10 most intense, most psychotic, and most disturbing facts about The Silence of the Lambs. But before we dive in, subscribe to my channel, so Hannibal Lecter doesn't get a craving for your flesh. Hannibal Lecter was inspired by a real killer. Although Hannibal Lecter is a fictional character, his roots are very real and chilling. While working on a prison report in Mexico, Thomas Harris, the author of the novel that The Silence of the Lambs is based on, met an elegant, polite surgeon named Alfredo Bali Trevino. The man made a strong impression, well-educated, articulate, calm, and intellectual. No one would suspect he had committed a brutal murder. And yet, Trevino had murdered and dismembered his lover, hiding the body in a metal box. The crime was so cold and methodical that it became infamous in Mexican legal history. Harris never forgot him, and when he created Lecter, the demonic intellectual with surgical precision and impeccable manners, he simply returned to that conversation. Hannibal isn't just a product of imagination, he's an echo of a real-life monster in human skin. Buffalo Bill was a composite of several real serial killers. The character of Buffalo Bill, the murderer who skins his victims to create a new identity, wasn't a random creation of horror fiction. Thomas Harris constructed him from elements of several real-life monsters whose crimes shocked America. The first was Ed Gein, a farmer from Wisconsin who, after his mother's death, began digging up corpses from cemeteries, skinning them, and using the remains to make masks, chairs, and even clothing. He fantasized about becoming a woman, and his house resembled a grotesque museum. Harris clearly drew on this when writing about the terrifying skin suit. Then came Ted Bundy, the infamous serial killer who lured women by pretending to be injured, sometimes wearing a cast or a sling, to evoke sympathy and lower his victim's guard. Buffalo Bill uses the exact same tactic in the van and sofa scene. The third influence was Gary Heidnik, a psychopath from Philadelphia who kept his victims imprisoned in a basement where he tortured and abused them for months. Sound familiar? It's a central element of The Silence of the Lambs' entire plot. Buffalo Bill wasn't born from imagination alone. He was stitched together from America's darkest real-life nightmares. Lecter's iconic hissing was an improvisation, unscripted, unplanned, and absolutely unforgettable. That chilling hiss Hannibal makes right after describing eating a liver, it became a legendary moment in cinema, even though it was never in the script. Anthony Hopkins came up with the idea during a rehearsal. He wanted to end his line with something more unsettling, something inhuman, so he added that eerie slithering pause as if the character wasn't just recalling a cannibalistic meal, but savoring it all over again. The result? Jodie Foster genuinely flinched. Her disturbed, slightly recoiling reaction in the film isn't acting, it's real instinctive fear. Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins barely spoke on set. Though they shared some of the most electrifying scenes in film history, Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins hardly spoke to each other during the filming of The Silence of the Lambs, but it wasn't because of any conflict, quite the opposite. Foster later admitted she was simply too terrified of Lecter's character. Hopkins had immersed himself so deeply into the role, with such icy calm and calculated presence, that she avoided him between takes. Even in the cafeteria, she tried not to sit too close. Interestingly, Hopkins kept his distance on purpose as well. He didn't want to soften the atmosphere. He believed that the sense of danger shouldn't exist just on screen, it had to linger between scenes too, to make the tension between their characters feel completely authentic. The FBI actually collaborated on the film. It might come as a surprise, but The Silence of the Lambs was made with the full cooperation of the FBI. The Bureau recognized the film's potential to reach millions and decided to use that to its advantage. Rather than blocking the production or distancing itself from a dark thriller about serial killers, the FBI actively got involved. Jodie Foster went through a kind of crash course. FBI consultants trained her in how a real agent behaves under threat, interviews witnesses, and navigates a crime scene. The filmmakers also had access to agents specializing in criminal profiling to give the story a greater sense of realism. But that wasn't all. The FBI also treated The Silence of the Lambs as something of a recruitment tool. After the film's release, there was a noticeable surge in women applying to join the Bureau. Clarice Starling became a symbol of courage, intelligence, and determination for many young women, and the FBI gained a new image, more modern, inclusive, and forward-thinking. The ending of Thomas Harris's novel was changed. Although The Silence of the Lambs is now considered a perfectly crafted thriller, the film's ending differs significantly from the original novel, especially in its final moments. In Thomas Harris's book, Hannibal Lecter doesn't just vanish without a trace, he also sends Clarice a letter dripping with erotic undertones. In it, he expresses fascination, desire, and a kind of psychological bond he believes they share. Subtle but deeply unsettling. The filmmakers, however, decided that was too risky. They feared that the carefully built relationship between Clarice and Lecter might veer into uncomfortable territory, and that audiences might start viewing Lecter as a romantic anti-hero. But that was never the intention. After all, he's still a ruthless cannibal and a manipulative psychopath. The poster of The Silence of the Lambs hides a dark secret. The iconic poster shows Clarice Starling with a moth covering her mouth, one of the most recognizable images in cinema history. But this isn't just any moth, it's a death's head hawk moth, an insect steeped in ominous symbolism associated with decay, death, and madness. The fact that it appears in the film as a symbol of Buffalo Bill's transformation is already a powerful touch. But there's more. Look closely at the skull-like marking on the moth's back. It's not just artistic design, it's actually a real work of art. The poster's designers used a modified version of a 1951 photograph by Philippa Halsman and Salvador Dali titled In Voluptas Mors, in which a group of nude women is arranged to form the shape of a human skull. Yes, the symbol of death you see on the poster is actually made from human bodies. The film won the so-called Oscar Big Five. The Silence of the Lambs isn't just a cult thriller and a blueprint for countless films that followed, it's also one of only 3 movies in history to win the so-called Oscar Big Five. What does that mean? It swept the 5 most prestigious Academy Awards: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Actor in a Leading Role, and Best Actress in a Leading Role. What's more, The Silence of the Lambs remains the only horror film ever to win Best Picture. And Anthony Hopkins? He won his Oscar for just 16 minutes of screen time. That alone shows how powerful his performance was. One of the most intense and celebrated roles in cinema history, in a film that was expected to be just another thriller. Lecter hardly blinks at all. Anthony Hopkins created one of the most unsettling characters in film history, not just through chilling dialogue or cold, calculated expressions, but also through a subtle, deliberate acting technique. He barely blinks. Hopkins consciously limited his blinking during scenes with Clarice to create the effect of an intense, unnatural stare, as if Lecter were piercing into her soul. The result? The audience begins to feel deeply uneasy, even without knowing exactly why. It's a subtle but incredibly effective way to evoke fear and discomfort, a masterclass in psychological acting. Anthony Hopkins was on screen for only 16 minutes. It might seem unbelievable, but Anthony Hopkins appeared on screen for just 16 minutes. That's less than some supporting characters in the film. And yet, his performance was so intense, hypnotic, and unforgettable that he won the Oscar for Best Leading Actor. It remains one of the shortest performances ever to earn that award. The Academy simply couldn't ignore the sheer impact of his portrayal. It just goes to show how incredibly powerful that role was, and how deeply Lecter sank his teeth into the audience's psyche.